Boker Tov, or no, Tzaraim Tovim, or good evening anyways. Hello, how's everybody? You can hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, very good. Okay.
Wow, where are you?
I am in Nice, France. That's why the shear's at 12 o'clock and whatever. That's why it's so whatever. That's of course why we're not doing our regular topic this week and whatever. So I figured since I don't like to miss the shear, we'll talk about some of the what I call the sages of Provence, and we'll see how it goes. We'll took if you have any I have a whole list of people we can talk about. Obviously, we're not going to get through all of them. And I just want to sort of touch base. I don't know if any of you saw the article I sent out earlier this morning, just sort of a little bit of background. But just to begin, I don't know, who here has been in Provence, in the south of France? Raise your hand. Nobody's raising their hand. Okay, so I assume nobody's been. I've never been here. I've never been to France before. Um, so basically, Provence is like I used to joke that Provence before I got here, I guess it hasn't changed since I got here. Provence is like the Dominican Republic and shortstops and baseball. So I remember when I was a kid growing up, there were, I believe, eight or nine shortstops, which is like, generally the top fielder on the team who came from the Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic is like a little nothing, I don't know, something connected to the United States. How in the world did they get like eight shortstops in Major League Baseball? So that's how Provence was like this little area. It's not so little, but a little bit of south of France, and it produced like amazing rabbis, some of the greatest rabbis in Jewish history. And one of the reasons it did that is because it basically took the best of Ashkenaz and Sfard. It's between Ashkenaz and Sfard. And when we talk about borders, so borders moved. And, you have people hear stories like they never moved their house, but they lived in five countries. People grew up before the war. Because one week it was Poland, then it was Russia, then it was Lithuania, and then the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Things changed. So in the Middle Ages, you had a little bit of that. Like when we think of Barcelona, which I wrote is much closer to Provence than Paris. Paris is like 10 hours away from here, hundreds of miles away. And it's a totally different like culture. North France, which is basically Rashi, and the Ballet Hatosfot. When we think of Ashkenaz, so and that area is like totally separate. And it's now part of the same country, but it had nothing to do with Provence. And Provence was much closer to the Jews of Sfarad, let's say in Barcelona. Now, Barcelona was not really part of Spain either. The Ramban lived near Barcelona in Girona. It's about a 45-minute drive away. Rabbeinu Yonah, the Ramban, lived in Girona. And that totally was a totally different culture than the south of Granada, let's say in the south of Spain, where the Rambam grew up. And the, these differences express themselves in what Jews put emphasis on. So the Ashkenazic, when Rashi Tosfot, first of all, they're living under Christian rule. So they don't study philosophy. They don't study any secular subjects. This is like the Torah only approach. We're oversimplifying. And Sfarad, as we all know, Sfarad, the Jews were very into philosophy. I always write my favorite book, the Sefer HaChinuch, was written because the son of one of the great rabbis was becoming non-observant because he was much more interested in Greek philosophy, Spanish philosophy. The Torah was like, it's second rate. It can't compete. And his father wrote a book to tell him how beautiful the mitzvot are and how the meaning that they have. And basically, Provence, which is a little bit in the middle, took the intensity of learning of Ashkenaz, which was more intense than in Sfarad, let's say in Spain, and the openness to culture that they had in Sfarad and combined the two. That's what, again, it's probably a little bit of an oversimplification, but that's what, yeah, Provence was the seat of, you had like rationalists here, like unbelievable. And we'll get to them in a few minutes. Maimonides, of course, is a great rationalist, and that's one of the big debates, rationalism, mysticism. I mean, it's in this period where the Zohar first becomes revealed. When I say this period, I mean the time of the Ramban, that the Zohar is first, depending on your perspective, written or discovered, but whatever, it was unknown. The Zohar was for sure unknown before the 12th century. But they, so that. philosophy, Kabbalah, these were areas of major dispute, what to study. And the Rambam had zero interest in Kabbalah, knew from nothing Kabbalah. The Ramban is a great Kabbalist, and half of his commentary in the Chumash is Al Derech Hasod, according to the secrets, the Kabbalistic idea. And there were big debates to study Kabbalah, as there were in philosophy. The Rashba, who is the student of the Ramban. The Ramban dies in 1271, and the Rashba, Rav Shlomo ben Aderet, he succeeds him, or he's seat of his main student, and he put a ban on the study, a cherem, on the study of philosophy, till I believe at least the age of 25. There was a fear of that, and again, this community did accept it, didn't accept it. Okay, but let's talk about the Jews of Provence. First of all, it's a beautiful area. I mean, Nice is a big city. We just got here a few hours ago, but the places we were in, I mean, you never heard of these places probably. I can't pronounce half of them actually. Aros and okay, in Jewish is Lunel, Narbonne, Aros, have all these towns. Right, great people living. So why don't I start on the one who probably had, in many ways, the most influence on us, and that's the Meiri, Rav Menachem Meiri. Does somebody want to tell me about the Meiri a little bit? Who wants to tell me just a sentence or two, just to see where people are holding?
We lost all his writings for hundreds of years.
Right. Very good. Right. I wouldn't say we lost his writings. I said we didn't have the writings till the 20th century. We knew he existed, and we had some of his writings because they were quoted by other Rishonim, but we didn't have the main work, the Beit HaBchira, which is the main commentary on the Talmud. And because of that, of course, there's Rav Soloveitchik was not a fan of the Meiri, and this is Rav Soloveitchik and Chazon Ish, because they felt that the reason Rishonim, early authorities, have carry so much weight because people have studied their works for hundreds of years and critiqued it and defended it, etc. It went through a whole process, and the Meiri never really went through that process. It's the same debate we have when you discover a manuscript. How important are manuscripts? And the Chazon Ish, he was very much opposed to manuscripts. We don't care. And Rav Avad Yosef was all in favor of manuscripts. We find a new manuscript, so we have to change our whole understanding. Even halachot have to change because we find new things. This again is an ongoing debate. Okay, just hold on a second.
I have three things to say about the Meiri.
Oh yeah, what do you want to say, David?
Number one, he, as opposed to the Rashba, was very influenced by the Rambam and was favorable to philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, his Hebrew is extremely crisp and reads like you're reading modern Hebrew.
100%. He's so easy to understand, unlike all the other Rishonim, for sure.
Unbelievable. Beautiful
Yes.
Hebrew. And number
Right,
three,
it's long,
Right.
but it's really clear and really easy to understand. You read the Rashba, the Chidushei Ramban, Talmud, it's hard. It's hard, yeah. Okay,
very
great.
rational. And number three, he's perhaps very well known for his tolerant view of Christianity.
Right, exactly. That's why I started with him. By the way, just to get to his years, I believe he was from 1249 to 1312, something like that, or around the years he lived. And the reason I picked him and I said he's the most influential is because he was the one who said that Christians are not to be considered idolaters. Now, that tells you two things. Halachically, it's very important because if we consider Christians idolaters, you can't do business with them basically ever, almost, or ever on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or sorry, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, because 3 days before their holiday, every Sunday, maybe afterwards, and there are all kinds of restrictions on our relationship with idolaters, and that's the first big fat Tosfot in Masechet Avodah Zarah that they just started in Daf Yomi recently. So the first Mishnah in Daf Yomi says that we're not allowed to do business 3 days before their idolaters' holidays because they're going to take the business proceeds. They're very pious, and they're going to go to church, and they're going to thank, Jesus and Mary, and they're going to thank their gods for their success in business and give charity. And because we did business with them, we are promoting that. It's like a leaf naiver. So it's so it's Tosfot wonders, so how do we all do business? So Tosfot, like all the medieval people really living under Christianity, assume Christians were idol worshippers, right? The Sephardim are living under Islam by and large, the Ashkenazim under Christianity. So Tosfot has to struggle to justify the business practices of Jews in the medieval ages. They're not, and I always say the most powerful and really a Musar Haskell for us, very important for us, is Rabbeinu Tam says, it doesn't really count when they go to church. You know why? Because their parents schlepped them. They don't really believe in it. They go because their parents make them to go. It's like minhag avotenu v'yadechem. So it's a very nice thing. It gets us out of dealing with them. But for us, it's really powerful. If you think about it, it means you do something because, and I say that all the time, I'm sometimes jealous of people, I guess I want to say Bali Tshuva, people who grow up non-religious, they choose to do it. And it's a wonderful thing. I do it because I don't know, do I choose to daven every morning? It's sort of, it's like I breathe, like it's just something I do. So anyways, that's a very powerful idea. So they had a struggle. The Meiri has, of course, a much better approach. The Meiri says that any religion that teaches morality and has basic moral principles is not idolatrous. So that tells you right away that when the Meiri lived, Christians were good to Jews, right? We have this notion that it was always bad for Jews. It's totally not true. Yes, it's wasn't like Democrats, like democracy of today, but there were long stretches of time in many places where Jews lived very, very well. So that Meiri, even though not, people argue, do we hold like it halakhically? I think for sure in the modern Orthodox community, and even in the non-modern Orthodox community, the Haredi community, 99.9% of people live by that. Because if you go shopping ever on this, for sure, if you go on a Sunday, you're basically accepting this, unless you want to rely, well, they're not religious, which may be true too, but we know around Christmas time how much the idea of how Christian it is. Of course, you might argue it's all it doesn't really count. It's not religious, but the Meiri really makes that issue much easier. That's what he's probably today most famous for. But as David points out, he really wrote a very important and very easy and comprehensive commentary on the Talmud. If you want to understand what's going on, and you're right, it reads like in modern Hebrew, even though it was written hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Okay, that's the Meiri. I want to talk a little bit about the Ravid and the Baal Or. So I mentioned what I wrote this morning because I love this. Why is the Baal Or? You see, why is the Baal Or called this comment? The Baal Or is Rabbi Zerachia Halevi, one of the most, by the way, almost all, especially in places like Provence, but in everywhere pretty much. All these great tourist scholars were all fascinating people. They're all unique individuals. There was no cutter, not like today, everybody dressed alike and thinks alike, and they're told das Torah. And there was none of that in the Middle Ages. And a lot of these people had very unique views, and everybody did their own thing. They did their own thing. So I just quote, and then we'll get to maybe some lesser known figures. So the Baal Or never wore tzitzis in his life. And I don't know if I mentioned that before. That's not because he wasn't a religious Jew. That's because he was of the opinion, it's a debate in the Talmud, whether if you don't have tchelet, we read last week, now you understand there's no obligation to wear a four-corner garment. Nobody has to wear a four-corner garment. But if you wear a four-corner garment, you're obligated to put on tzitzit. It's better not, if you wear a four-corner garment without tzitzit, you are mevatel mitzvah to say you are nullifying a positive mitzvah. That's not allowed. So to wear a four-corner garment, you can't put on tchelet. Better not to wear a four-corner garment at all, because without tchelet, there's no mitzvah of tzitzis. So the Baal Or never wore tzitzis in his life. That's I always say when a yeshiva kid, Rosh Yeshiva, pats him on his back, are you wearing tzitzis? Like they used to do to us sometimes, just say, I follow the Baal Or. I follow the Baal Or. I don't wear tzitzis, But of course now we have tchelet, so it's not that excuse doesn't work anymore. The truth of the matter is, Rav Schachter, unless he's changed his view, but when I heard him speak, and that number of times he said, it's forbidden. Obviously, this view is not widely accepted. He holds it's forbidden to wear tzitzis without chelet. You should not wear tzitzis because when we didn't have tchelet, okay, so we didn't have tchelet, so we follow the view that even without tchelet, you can wear tzitzis. But once we have tchelet, then that view is no longer tenable, and therefore you shouldn't wear a tallis at all unless you're going to have tchelet. Now, obviously, that view is not being accepted. But I will tell Mark Spear, of course, runs our trips and really adds so much fascinating information. So I'm going to say to you, here's something I never heard of before. In Marseille, where we started, the minhag was that it says that when they came to Yishtabach, right before Baruch, right, to daven with the minyan, the chazan would get up, put on a talis, and say Baruch. Now, what does that mean? It means nobody wore a talis in Marseille. Just the chazan wore a talis. Now, I don't know if that's, in other words, the chazan, everybody's sitting and davening there without a talis. The chazan, as the shlich tzibur, would get up in front at Yishtabach, and he would put on his talis, and then he would daven. It's that's really strange, but that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you had a lot of. I mentioned under. I think I mentioned they used to say Avinu Malkeinu when Rosh Hashanah was on Shabbos. They did a lot of different things. They never said Sim Shalom that we spoke about in our Siddur classes last few weeks. Only Shalom Rav. They had different things, but the Baal Or, that's just a little one of his quirky things that he never wore tzitzis in his life. He also says that in Provence, where he in Lunel, that's where he lived, they used to say Malchiot, Zichronot, and Shofarot at all 4 tefillot of Rosh Hashanah. So at Mariv, Shachrit, and Mincha. You can imagine. I imagine most people say, "Wow, thank God we don't follow that more." You never get out of shul if you had to say Malchiot, Zichronot, and Shofarot at Shachrit, and Mincha and Mariv. You'd have an extra 4 hours of davening on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, but that was the minhag they had. All kinds of different minhagim. Now, I quote them. Why is his book called the Baal? Why the Baal HaMaor? The author, the Baal, the master of light. So I guess nobody read what I wrote this morning. That's okay. So that's because he lived in Lunel, and even though my French is very poor, Lunel is the moon. And the moon has very little light. It's reflect. It doesn't. It just takes the light of the sun. You have to give light in Lunel. So he wrote Hamaor, the Baal Hamaor. That's what he's called. And on the easy Masechtot, on Moed, like on Purim, that kind of stuff, that's considered easier. It's called Hamaor Hakatan, the small, like the moon. And on the Zikin, on the Babas, the heavy-duty, difficult stuff, he called Hamaor HaGadol. You need the light of the sun. The light of the moon is not enough to illuminate the text. So that's what the Baal HaMaor, that's why I call it the Baal HaMaor. Does anybody know what the Baal HaMaor is? Like, what is it? So the Baal HaMaor is a commentary. It's not really a commentary on the Talmud. I wrote it on the Talmud. It's not really on the Talmud. It's a critique of the Rif. Rav Yitzchak El-Fazi, who lived in Fez in Morocco, and Sephardic Jew, he dies in 1038, if I'm not mistaken, the Rif. And it was common before Daf Yomi was invented, because before printing presses, you can't have Daf Yomi, and it was really, that's for sure. Even if you want Daf Yomi, you can't have Daf Yomi. But before Daf Yomi, it was very common for Jews to study the Rif. They didn't study Talmud. Who needs all that extra questions back and forth? We don't care. We don't follow. The Rif took the bottom line of the Talmud. He cut out all the Shaklavataria pretty much. He took the bottom line. It's very common. People would study Talmud and Rif. Nobody does that anymore. Things change. Things change. So the Rif was considered like, one of the greatest of the greats. He's one of the pillars, the Shulchan Aruch. When the Shulchan Aruch wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he based on the Rif, the Rif, the Rosh, and the Rambam. And the Baal HaMaor, he wasn't so crazy. I mean, it's like always, he had great respect for the Rif. When you write a commentary, when you write a critique of a book, it means you think the book is worthy. If the book's a piece of, you couldn't care less about the book, you're not going to write it's not worthy of a critique. So the Baal HaMaor is the critique of the ideas of the Rif. It's very interesting. He writes at the beginning, the Baal HaMaor, that Talmud is not like mathematics. He says in mathematics, you have clear proofs. You can prove, you have a theory and you have an equation and you can prove things. He says Talmud doesn't work that way. Talmud is logical arguments, and the arguments can work both ways. So there are no definitive argument, which of course is right away tells you the Rif can be right and the Balamor can be right, even if they say opposite things. Now, of course, so the Balamor, it's you look in the back of the Talmud, in the back of every Talmud is the Rif, and at the bottom of the page is either the Ma'or HaKatan, the light of the moon, or the Ma'or HaGadol from Lunel, the light of the sun. And then, of course, what always happens is the Ramban, who is Mr. Peace, or Nachmanides, Ramban always tries to make peace between competing people. So the Ramban wrote, well, it doesn't sound so peaceful. He wrote the Mechamas Hashem, the wars of God. That's next to the Balamor, the opposite side of the Rif. On the inside of the Rif is the Balamor, and the outside is the Mechamat Hashem. The Ramban defends the Rif against the attacks of the Balamor, which is exactly what he does in what he tried to do in the dispute on the Rambam, which began in Provence in 1232, the major dispute beyond the Montpellier, on which we were the other day. That's where the disputes, we'll get there in a moment. But anyways, the Ramban is generally peacemakers. That's the Balam Or. I just want to talk a little bit. I'll mention somebody who probably people have heard about much less, is Rav Yosef Ibn Kaspi. He lived in Arles. Arles was a big city in Provence. Anybody heard of him, Ibn Kaspi? Okay, Ruth, what do you know about him?
I know he existed and he's
Huh?
a data.
Okay.
That's all I know.
Well, first of all, Kaspi come from Kesef, silver. That's the name. Every book of his has the name Kesef in it. What Mark pointed out, he was an extreme rationalist, like most of the Jews in Vermont. That's why even the Maimonidean controversy was started by rationalists. It wasn't started by anti-rationalists. That's the mistake people make, but we'll come back to that, I hope. But I just want to say one thing that Ibn Kaspi said that Mark pointed out that I thought was fascinating. Ibn Kaspi says that the Torah sometimes presents things that aren't true because it's what people believed in. It's kind of like what the Rambam says in the Mor Nevuchim. The Rambam says there are necessary beliefs and true beliefs. And the Torah sometimes had to write things because people need to believe this, need to think this. It's not really important or not true, but it's the only way to get people to come closer to God. But he's not saying they're false, just saying they're necessary. Even Kaspi says the Torah has false ideas, but it contains these false ideas because that was what people believe in. And one of the examples he gave is the Dudaim by Rachel and Leah, that they have some power to get you pregnant. That's a Baba Maisa. But at the time is where people believed in it. And that's so the Torah records it. So this is, I don't know, I just find this a fascinating thing. But there was a much broader base medrash, in the medieval period. The Rambam they wanted to throw out, which is interesting. He's the one who stayed. But the other person who amazingly did not get thrown out of the base medrash is the Rabbi. He also lived here in Provence, Gershonides. He's one of the three Jews who has a crater named after him on the moon. Now I forget who the other two are. Maybe he'll come back to me. He invented Jacob's star. He was a great astrologer. In fact, anybody who has a name, Maimonides, Nachmanides, Gershonides, means he was an important secular figure. Rashi doesn't have like a name like that. And when they gave you that name, because you were important in secular learning. So Gershonides was one of the great astronomers and astrologers of his time, great scientist, great rationalist. And of course, as a great rationalist, he did not accept the view of the Rambam, the sort of very difficult philosophical problem of God's foreknowledge and man's free choice. These two ideas would seem to contradict each other, because if I know what you're going to do, you don't have free choice to do it. That's the problem we all know, right? That everybody, philosophers have struggled with. Rabbi Akiva and Pirkei Avos says, that's right, but it's okay. Both are true. You're right. God knows we're going to, we still have free choice. But how? How does that work? So the Rambam says it works because God doesn't think like because God's knowledge is different than man's knowledge, and we can't understand it. We can't understand God's knowledge, and you just have to live with it. You have to believe both are true. And the Rambam spent 2 chapters say if you don't believe in free choice, basically you're a heretic. And if you don't believe God knows everything, you're also a heretic, because it's impossible for if there's no free choice, then you can't get reward and punishment. The whole mitzvah system falls away. And if God doesn't know, God is omniscient. He knows everything. How we take away from the power of God? So therefore, both must be true. And we can't understand it. And the Ravid, who lived in Provence, we'll maybe get to him, Rav Avram ben David, the first critic of the Rama, who was the chavruta of the Balamor, that they learned together. So the Ravid says the Rambam, you know what? Just, learn how to be a teacher. Why do you raise problems you don't have answers to? In other words, the Rambam raises the question, like contradicting, said, no, that the answer is greater than the tallest mountain and wider than the sea, and we can't understand it, but you have to accept it. And the Rabbi said, no, that's a stupid thing to say. Don't raise questions. Let people, if nobody asks you the question, why do you have to raise a question that may lead some to heresy? That in itself is a fascinating debate. It's in Hilchot Tshuva. I think that's the end of the 5th chapter in Hilchot Tshuva of the Rambam, where we have this tension. So that's the Rambam's answer. What's the Rambam's answer? The Rambam's answer is God doesn't know the future. Why? Isn't that a weakness of God? No. Why? Can God make a triangle of 4 sides? No, because by definition, a triangle is 3 sides. It's not a triangle. So God, it only means something that can be theoretically done. God can do it, but God can't do things that go against the rules that work. So it's not a diminution of God's power to say he can't make a triangle of 140 degrees. Others would disagree, but I'm saying this is the Rabbi, and therefore, once God gave free choice to man, he took away his ability to have foreknowledge. Now, as Mark said, it's what's amazing is they didn't. The Rabbi is in Mikraot Gedolot. And they have, Moshe Rav Kook put out his commentary on the Chumash, a great rationalist. If today somebody said that, like, he's not going to get into the art scroll, anthology of great Talmudic, commentaries of the Torah. But the Rabbi, of course, many people disagreed with what he said, but it was a view. And by the way, there are other Rishonim who say the opposite, that man really doesn't have as much free choice as you'd like to believe. As a matter of fact, on our podcast of Jewish Ideas, which is really wonderful, that J.J. Kimchi does, actually, it's also Clyden. J.J. Kimchi is, as he told us, he is a descendant of the Radak, Rav David Kimchi, who is probably the most important commentary on Nach, on Nevi'im and Ksuvim. He's like, you have Rashi, but the Radak is the primary. The Radak, of course, lived in Provence. And so that's another connection. But the J.J. Kimchi interviewed, I think it was Aaron Siegel, who teaches philosophy, I think in Notre Dame, or maybe got his PhD in Notre Dame, maybe made Aliyah. And he talked about free choice. And at the end, he basically took the position that man doesn't really have complete free choice. No, because if God's going to know everything, we lost some of our free choice. So these are things we don't think about a lot, because our generation is not so into the study of philosophy, and even when it is, it's a different thing. But you should know these were views that were, percolating and were kind of acceptable views here. And it's very interesting that to hear these things. But that the Rabbi is really, he was and these. You had extreme rationalists here, people who believe that, you don't really have to put on tefillin. Tefillin, it's just a symbol. You had all kinds of interpretations, some of which were considered have gone too far. Now, the Rambam did not live in Provence. The Rambam, as far as I know, never stepped foot in Provence. He never stepped foot in this north of Spain, never near Barcelona. He was born in the south of Spain, was in Morocco, then traveled, we believe, to Israel for a very short period of time, and then spent the remainder of his life in Egypt. The Rambam dies in 1204. Now, the Ravid, who is the main critique of the Rambams of the Mishnah Torah, the Ravid lived in Provence, and like I say, he and the Balamor learned together. The Ravid was about 10, 15 years older than the Rambam. The Rambam, they used to think the Rambam was born in 1135. If you read the old books in old encyclopedias, the Rambam was born in 1135. We now know for a fact he was born in 1138. Now, I mean, do we really care? I mean, I guess if you're living at the time, you might care. But the idea is the Rambam accomplished what he did 3 years, with 3 years less years than we thought he had. And I think the Rabbi was born like 1125, something like that. And the Rabbi was like the older Rabbi. Out comes the Rambam. And of course, the Rambam was very controversial in many ways, which we're not going to get into now. But I always like to quote, the one, a few passages. The Rabbi could be, like all these people, they could be harsh critics. But again, it's of great respect. So I always like to quote that the Rambam writes that on Pesach, the Korban Pesach, you can eat the Gid Hanasha. You don't have to take the Gid Hanasha out. That's only all year. But for the Korban Pesach, you don't have to take it out. Yeah, I know. So Ruth is looking, oh my God, that's terrible. How can the Rambam say such thing? So that's what the Ravid says. So the Ravid says, I want you to know, if the Rambam were to bring his Korban Pesach, I would pick it up and I would throw it on the floor and I would step on it and destroy it and break all its bones so he couldn't bring the Korban Pesach. And that's just one of the, sharp comments of the Ravid against the Rambam. But the Ravid really was the first one to write Aleph Aleph. You look Amar Avram. There were three Ravids in the Middle Ages. One historian, there were three Rav Avram ben David's, three Ravid. But this is the most famous of the three. The Ravid and the Rambam, and of course, I'll ask. Maybe it's not fair, but I'll ask anyways. People know who is the modern scholar who wrote on the Ravid. Anybody know? So probably
Isidore
yes,
Tversky.
very good, thank you. Isidore Tversky, the Rev's son-in-law, the Talmud Rebbe, who professor at Harvard. Mark Shapiro, of course, leads these trip. He was the last person to get his PhD under Tversky, and Isidore Tversky. It's just sort of a new genre. He was a student of Wolfson, I think was his name, was at Harvard before him. I think Wolfson had learned in like Hungarian yeshivot, and then he came to America. And I don't even know if he was totally from anymore, but he was one of these great Talmidei Chachamim, became a great scholar at Harvard. And of course, Tversky was a Hasidic Rebbe and, taught it at Harvard. And I read the book many years ago, Ravid of Pasquiers, or however you pronounced it, Pasquiers. And it's a fascinating book. But that was introduced really a new genre of historical biographies. This is what Mark did his on the Sridei. We wanted to do a program many years ago. We wanted to have Mark Shapiro and Jonathan Rosenblum in a discussion about how to write biographies on Gedolei Torah, the historical, critical, academic approach, where you put the person in context and you evaluate their successes and failures, and you critique them and and the influences, what influenced their thought, and that's anathema to let's say the art school view of history. That's an approach that's anathema, and I don't know. To me, that's the only approach you can have. It's the yes, it be what is the true approach. But that was really Isidore Tversky oversaw a lot of PhDs like J.J. Schechter did his PhD in Rav Yaakov Emden. So these are all scholarly works. They're not what's the word, hagiographies, where you just point out the wonderful things, like that Rav Hutner criticized. Rav Hutner has a famous letter. Rav Yitzchak Hutner who was at our most recent or second most recent podcast that J.J. Kimchi did, fascinating, on Rav Yitzchak Hutner. His thought, really very interesting. A book recently came out, that's what they interviewed. So Rav Hutner writes a letter, he's very upset, you read these stories on they're all the same, at 6, they knew Shas, and at 10 they gave a pilpul in front of the who knows who, and and they never struggled. And he says, "Oh, Papa Mice is all ridiculous," and whatever. But there is this important genre of literary, of critical academic works that can muster a PhD at Harvard. Now it's not so impressive, Harvard University, but there was a time. Said a PhD from Harvard University, that was impressive. So anyways, that's the Ravid. That's Isidore Tversky, the Rav Soloveitchik's son-in-law, who is the modern day scholar, the Ravid. Of course, the Dr. Tversky also wrote actually a larger book on an introduction to the guide of Maimonides, not the guide, I mean, of the Mishnah Torah. I don't know if anybody has read it or seen it. It's like 500 pages, also an academic work. But yeah, in that sense, he's a great Talmudist also. But so it's interesting that Dr. Tversky wrote on the Rambam and on the Ravid. Both of them, spent much of his scholarly efforts on that. Okay. Let's discuss a little bit the Rambam controversy that I said began in Provence in Montpellier. Um, Montpellier. So I didn't realize that it was started on. I forget. Rab Avram Minahar. You have a lot of medieval authorities. Rab this one Minahar, this Minahar. What is Minahar? It means they live in Montpellier, because it was the mountain. So they got their name. There are no last name, so they call it Minahar. That's a common rabbinic name, Minahar. So as I wrote at the end of my thing that I sent out this morning, um, the Rambam wrote everything in Arabic. That was the language that intellectuals studied. Now in Rashi, Tosfot, in Christian and Europe and in Ashkenaz, nobody studied Arabic, nobody studied philosophy. They didn't have any needs for these works. Now, why did the Rambam write every work in Arabic?
It was his
Well,
natural language.
Yeah, that's what he spoke. That's like
Well,
English.
he spoke a very impressive Hebrew too, because the Mishnah Torah is amazing Hebrew. But it's because the same reason we write in English. If you want to reach people, you write to them in the language they know best. So why did he write the Mishnah Torah in Hebrew?
He wanted
He
to.
wrote everything in Arabic. The introduction to the Mishnah, his commentary on the Mishnah, his letter on astrology, which we'll get to in a moment. He wrote everything in Arabic. Igeret Teiman, everything he wrote in Arabic. Just wrote one book, 1,000 chapters. I always like to point that out, right? That's no coincidence. There are 1,000 chapters in the Mishnah Torah, but that he wrote in Hebrew because every other book pretty much was written to people of his time. The Moreh Nevuchim, the guide to the perplexed of his time. There's an updated Krochmal wrote in the 18th century, I believe, wrote an updated guide to perplexed for Biyamenu, like the guide to perplexed of our day. Because in every generation, there are different issues that are percolating, that people are struggling with. So the Rambam the guide to perplexed was written as really a letter to somebody who was troubled by many things in Judaism. So you're writing for your time, for the people who you know, who you're trying to influence. The Mishnah Torah was totally different. The Mishnah Torah was the constitution of the Jewish people for all time. And that's why the Rambam is the only person to write in his code of laws that have no applicability during the exile. And it's a good thing because of him. Now that we're back in Israel, there's certain things we can determine that nobody else wrote about it. Because the Rif only wrote about things that were practical. He didn't comment on the things that were not practical. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't comment on things that are not practical. The Torah, all the great codes ignored everything. They were writing codes for their time. How does a Jew observe Jewish law? The Rambam was doing something much grander. The Rambam was writing the constitution of the Jewish people for all time. And therefore he writes the wars of kings, and that's how he ends. Kings and wars and everything to do with Israel. And the details of sacrifices and rebuilding the temple and Kohanim and the clothes of Kohanim, all the stuff that has zero applicability. The Rambam writes details and details of all these laws. And you also realize, I don't know if it's connected, but you have to understand the Rambam also wrote that it's possible to reinvent smicha today. If all the rabbis would agree, and therefore you could create a Sanhedrin, all kinds of things. The Rambam had a much broader vision. So therefore, Hebrew is the language of the Jewish people. For the constitution of the Jewish people, that's written in Hebrew, not in Arabic. Anyways, very, very briefly, so he dies in 1204. There was some controversy during his lifetime, absolutely, on the Rambam. But the real controversy begins in 1232 when one of the Minhahars in Montpellier gets the Rambam, and he, it wasn't on the Mor Nevuchim. That comes later. That's another stage of the debate. I know it comes later, but it's a different stage. There were a lot of things, but the two main things that trouble people in the Rambam, if everybody opens up a Rambam, when does the Rambam begin his exposition of Jewish law? So the Rambam begins, there are 14 books. Rambam divides the Mishnah into 14 books. The Shulchan Aruch divides into 4. Rambam needs more, 14. Number 1 is Sefer Hamada, the book of knowledge. That's how they normally translate it. And Sefer Hamada begins with Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah, the foundations of Torah. And the Rambam begins, what does it begin? Yesodei Yesodot V'Amud HaChachamot, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the foundation and pillar of pillars, to know that there's a God, one God, who created everything, and etc. And then he goes on for the first 4 chapters to talk basically philosophy and metaphysics and physics and all these complicated the aspects about God, and that's where he says the study of Talmud, that's minor. That's minor stuff. The really important stuff is Maseh Merkava, to study divine things, which the Rambam says is metaphysics, philosophy. That's the real study. You got to know, okay, you have to know how to live as a Jew. You got to know Hilchot Shabbos, but let's do the real stuff. By the way, what I should have also mentioned by Ibn Kaspi, that's the one who said the Torah puts in weird things that aren't true because people believed it. So Ibn Kaspi writes that somebody once came to him with a shaila and about a meat spoon, a milk, falls into the meat pot. And he said he doesn't know what to do. And he went to the rabbi to ask it's just like this great, biblical commentary. So he wrote, I'm not at all embarrassed that I don't know the halacha. That's not my job. I'm involved in more important things. I'm studying divine, an understanding of God. I don't have to waste my time with halacha. You got a halachic problem, you go to ask the posek. The truth of the matter, that's very much the Brisker approach, but not from that angle of studying philosophy, but of studying Talmud. And that's why the Brisker, I mentioned a number of times, Rav Chaim Brisker, when he got his job, it was on condition that he doesn't have to paskin shilas, because which is unbelievable. Because he could always see 2 sides to every issue. And I mentioned the story many times. He once had a question. He sent to Rav Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, the great posek in Kovno that Yeshiva University is named after. And he said, I want a yes or no answer. Because if you give me explanations, I'm going to tell you why your explanations are wrong. Whatever you give me. If you give me yes explanations, I'll tell you why no. And then I can't accept your answer. But so that was, he said, that's not for me. That's like Rav Soloveitchik in Ish Halacha, the theory of halacha, not the practical. They don't care about the practical aspect. They care about the theoretical foundations of the halacha. The Ibn Kasbi is saying it on a much higher, of a much more powerful, or level. And I'm not studying the philosophy of halacha. I'm studying philosophy. I'm studying the philosophy of God. So I don't have to be bothered by halachic, little issues, and I'll go ask the rabbi if I have a problem. So that's basically what the Rambam says in the first 4 chapters in the of the Halakha book, which is probably why most people have never read it here. It's also a little bit difficult to understand the Galgalim. It's not always clear exactly what he's talking about. And then in Perek 5, he begins Kol Beit Yisrael Mitzuvim al Kiddush Hashem. He starts with the mitzvah of giving up your life if you have to for the sake of God. Very fascinating. That's how you Kol Beit Yisrael, that expression. Kol Beit Yisrael, men, women, children, everybody. Kol Beit Yisrael Mitzuvim al Mitzvah Kiddush Hashem. That's how he starts the 5th chapter. So the first 4 chapters got people really angry. And then, of course, many things in the Mor Nevuchim got things angry. Make a long story short, from Montpellier, they sent people to go gather signatures against the Rambam. Go to the north of France, where the rabbis don't study philosophy at all. And, they got together all these people. And if you weren't in Cherem, you were a nobody. It's like in the end in Eifshitz controversy. Any rabbi of any significance was excommunicated, because they excommunicated well, they were mad. The Rambam supporters were really mad at the people who were against the Rambam. How can you do this to the Rambam? And they burnt his books. We'll get to in a moment. And then, of course, the people who were anti-Rambam says, how can you follow the Rambam? He's a heretic, and you're all excommunicated. It's very sad. But he's not the only one. The Ramchal was many of the great rabbis were totally persecuted. It's a badge of honor to be persecuted. It's often painful when you go through it, but the fact that rabbis yell and scream at you, no, no, no. If you're doing what's right and good, don't worry that rabbis are yelling and screaming. I mean, you should know, have some basis what you're doing. Not you can do whatever you want, but it's okay. Some of the greatest rabbis. I mean, the Mesilat Yesharim we have by accident. People were just considered the greatest Musar book because they made a deal that he had to leave town, leave Italy, and he had to go to and he had to burn all his books because he was studying Kabbalah 20. He was seeing all these wild ideas, and he thought he was a real danger and the heretic. They burned that book, but some people they smuggled out whatever. They didn't burn the Mesilat Yesharim, and then that became the the greatest book of in the Muslim movement. So. The Rambam country was very terrible. They got the books burned by the Dominicans. They got the non-Jews to burn the book. That's in 1232, and it's there's a well-known comment in 1240. In Paris, northern France, the Talmud was burned. 24. It's one of the keynote we say on Tisha B'av, Shalis Rufa B'Eish. They took 24. Not truckloads, the horse loads, I don't know, of all these books. And there was really fear that, and I'm sure some was, lost forever. They had no backups. It would take you 5 years to to write a Talmud. Unless you were a multimillionaire, you didn't own a Talmud. I mean, you know how expensive it is, word to print out word for word to write the Talmud. So they burnt it all. And Rabbeinu Yonah, who was one of the big anti-Maimonideans, he said, this is our punishment and for what we did to the Rambam, and it was a huge mistake. And of course, eventually, the Rambam becomes very well accepted. I just want to do one more thing. I have to end a little bit early because we got to go daven at 7:30. Daven at 20. It's now 6:47 here, and. Okay, going to walk to shul, but I just want to mention the Rambam's letter of astrology that was written to the rabbis of Provence, where they were dealing with astrology. Now, the Rambam, in the Middle Ages, astrology was considered a science, or according to many people, considered as astrology. And I think, let me see if I get them all right. There were basically 4 views in Judaism about astrology. Number one, astrology is true. And when we say Mazel Tov, that's the Ein Mazal Yisrael. Mazel means the stars. When we say Mazel Tov today has nothing to do with what it actually means. Mazel Tov in the Gemara means that your Mazal, your constellation, shall be good. This is a astrological thing that astrology. So some say astrology is true, but you're not allowed to follow it because the Torah doesn't want us to base our decisions based on astrology. Some say, although astrology is not true, and you're not allowed to follow it. Some say, hold on, some say it is true and you can't follow it. It is true you can't follow it. It's not true. I'm missing one. It's not true and you can't follow. And it's not true, and therefore you're not allowed to follow because you're an idiot, and because it's just something that is incorrect. So the Rambam was of the view that astrology is obviously it's the great rationalist. The Rambam is going to be of the view that it's totally wrong. Yes, Susan, please.
There's a pasuk in Chumash that says not to look up at the stars and try to read them. Asher Hashem la'amim, that Hashem has given it over to the other nations, that so people interpret that it could be a power to it, but it's not for us because we have Hashem, we have the Torah.
Right. So that's the question. Ein Mazal Yisrael. Right.
Use
right.
that pasuk to
right. So that's one view. It does have power. It's really true. We're just not allowed to use it. And some say it is powerful. It's really true. In other words, that's not the way we moderns think. We think, I don't know, the horoscope, it's all a bunch of Baba Mises. But there are views, and if I'm not mistaken, the Ramban is of that view, that astrology is real, It's just the Torah does not allow us to use astrology. But the Rambam, of course, felt that it's false. In other words, you're not allowed to use it because it's wrong. It's just the whole thing doesn't make any sense. But this was, again, in the Middle Ages, and you have that, and that's really the debate, and that's the opinion of Ein Mazal Israel. The Jewish people are above the Mazalot, and the rules of astrology do not apply. But we know already the Gemara does have statements that definitely refer to astrological influences on people, and when people are born, definitely has say there is. It's like every issue in Judaism. It's much more complicated, and especially in the era where people were much more attuned to the study of philosophy. This was much people spent much more attention to these things. We today are not really involved in these ideas so much.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
before you go, can you say a couple of words about the community today and
Very,
especially
very quickly. Well, in France, there are about 500,000 Jews. France is the third largest Jewish community in the world after Israel and America. I mentioned Marseille is 90,000 Jews, where we were the first night. Shows there are ton, I've never been to Paris. This is my first time in France. I've never been to France before this. Where we are in Nice, we're going to daven at Chabad. Tonight we're davening at Chabad. Tomorrow we're davening in the big shul here. Some of these Montpellier today is 6,000 or 7,000 Jews. Some of these communities, like Aros, there's nobody left. We've seen a number of shuls already in smaller communities, beautiful shuls that the communities don't no longer exist. What can I tell you? But then in the south of France,
I was wondering yes or no, do they have any of the old strength in Hagen survived?
did any of them? I'm sorry.
You talked a lot. You talked at the beginning of the show about all kinds of crazy.
Oh, great. Yeah. Do any of their minhagim survive? Yes. I mean, we don't say Shechayanu on B'dikat Chametz like they did in Marseille. Kohanim duchening every day, that survives in a lot of places. I don't know. I don't know what have to go through. I mean, some do. Yeah. I mean, I wrote yesterday how long to wait between eating meat and milk. That I think people do follow provincial minhagim. It's a lot of the, but yes, a lot. I mean, normally we're pointing out minhagim that people don't do. We're pointing them out because they're interesting because they once exist. I don't have to tell you all the minhagim that we all do that we've been doing for 100 years. There was a minhag here that on Hoshana Rabbah, when they clapped the Hoshanas, they made a bracha on it. Very strange because we normally assume you don't make a bracha on minhagim. So, and like I said, they had a minhag to make a bracha on B'dikat Chametz. So you had all these interesting. I'll write a little bit more about some of them. Although minhagim we do keep. I don't know. Listen, if you want to study more, I mean, it's more on minhag Ashkenaz, but Yisrael Tashma has fantastic work like minhag Ashkenaz. What's it called? Minhag Ashkenaz Hakadmon, or I think early. There is a lot of work done on old minhagim that people no longer do. But like I always say, and I said before, I think I said last week, when you travel, you learn, you see the importance of how different minhagim, different things, and it should give us more tolerance and more understanding. I'll end by something also a little strange. And Mark pointed out, he said it's on YouTube, he could send us the link. I haven't looked for it. That was just today that the previous rabbi of Marseille, Rabbi Shitrit, who then became the chief rabbi of France. I don't think he's chief rabbi. Maybe he's still the chief rabbi of France. Shitrit is Haredi-ish, and there's a YouTube video of him speaking in a church or giving a eulogy in a church for the mayor of Marseille. And that was common in these, Jonathan Sachs used to go into churches, and that's in America, it's not done. But in Europe, it's much more acceptable. It has to do with the way we lived under, their authority. In all of ancient Europe, Jews always lived next door to the king's palace or the church, because it was a form of protection. The church generally did not believe in hurting Jews. I know that sounds a little strange. We don't have time to get into it. They didn't believe in physically hurting Jews. We had to suffer. We had to be downgraded. We rejected Jesus, but they didn't believe in killing us. And they were always were protected. And we often lived right next to the church or the king's palace. That serves to protect even the ghettos that they had here. The Jews welcomed the ghettos. It was a form of protection. The gates were locked at night. Nobody could get in. The community all came together, etc. So anyways, I really do have to go to shul. I'm happy, whatever. And I know it's maybe a little bit disorganized, but I just wanted to give a few, and I'm sort of been running around since we got here, but just a few sort of overview of some of the great rabbis we discussed. The Balam Or, his commentaries on the Reef, why he's called the Balam Or, the Rabbi, rationalism, the Meiri, of course, his notion of his views on Christianity, the dispute of the Rambam. And as you travel and you just learn a tremendous amount, you get a deep appreciation of how wonderful the Jewish people are. That, we have a 4,000-year-old tradition, and it's beautiful to go to places where, to walk in places where the Ravid walked and the Meiri walked and the Rabbi walked, and to see we're following the same Torah, and to go and to make history come alive. So please God, we'll see you next week, and I really do have to run. So wishing everybody a good Shabbos, and I see some Mel pointed a comment about the current chief rabbi. Yeah, of course, you're right, but Shitri was before. Okay, everybody. Shabbat shalom. Thank you very much. Be well.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Rabbi Jay.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye.
You kill it.